Before his life began to unravel, Tim Burns had everything mapped out. A man with clear ambitions, he had worked tirelessly to build a stable foundation for himself and his wife, Candy. They often talked about their dreams: a couple of children, a playful dog, and a cozy house with a garden just outside the city. Tim had even set aside money for a down payment on a home that would mark the start of their new chapter together. At the time, he had no reason to question their shared goals or the strength of their bond. But cracks in the marriage had started to show long before Tim noticed them. Candy's demeanor had changed subtly over the past year. She became more withdrawn, claiming her demanding coursework was the cause of her stress. She also began taking on unusual work shifts, which seemed out of character. Tim wanted to believe in his wife, so he didn't question her too closely. He convinced himself it was temporary and that they would soon return to the rhythm they had once enjoyed. The turning point came during a camping trip with Jake, Tim's boss. What should have been a weekend of camaraderie left Tim with a gnawing sense of unease. There was something unsettling about Jake's demeanor, the way he smirked knowingly during conversations. It planted a seed of doubt in Tim's mind, small at first, but it lingered long after the trip ended. Unbeknownst to him, that weekend marked the beginning of the betrayal that would shake the very foundation of his life. Tim Burns, a dependable man among his colleagues and close friends, glanced at his phone when a familiar chime announced a message from his wife, Candace, or Candy, as she liked to be called. 5 years into their marriage, Tim had just achieved a significant milestone at work, landing a major service deal with a California-based client. It was the kind of news his supervisor, Jake Hudson, would celebrate as a major coup for the team, and one that might even come with a well-earned raise. Maybe this is the sign we need, Tim thought, imagining starting the family he and Candy had always wanted. But something felt off. A nagging doubt had settled in after a camping trip with Jake just a week earlier. Since then, Candy seemed different. Distracted, short-tempered. One day, while doing laundry, Tim found a pair of her underwear with a strange, foul smell. It hit him hard. He couldn't shake the feeling something was wrong and decided to find out the truth. With a business trip to California coming up, Tim met with a family law attorney, Ruby Hawkins, to discuss his options. He wasn't sure if Candy had cheated, but he needed to know. "Are you sure she's been unfaithful?" Ruby asked, understanding his anxiety. "I can't say for sure," Tim answered, "but I need to know. If she has, I want a divorce." Ruby outlined the process. "You'll need hard evidence for infidelity, photos, videos, otherwise the divorce will likely be no fault." Tim was resolute. "Let's do it." Ruby gave him tools to track Candy's phone and record her conversations. Tim hated the idea of spying, but his suspicions were growing. Things got stranger. Since the trip, Jake's attitude had shifted, and Tim felt he was hiding something. Then, on the night Tim flew to California, Candy mentioned she'd be waitressing at a party Jake was hosting. "Jake asked me to fill in," she explained. "I'll make $150. Tim was uneasy, but told her to be careful. Later, he called Marvin Johnson, the private investigator he'd hired. "Candy's waitressing at Jake's party tonight," Tim said. "We'll look into it," Marvin assured him. The next day, Tim tried reaching Candy, but she didn't answer. Then Marvin sent an email. Candy spent the night at Hudson's house, attached her a few photos. Tim opened the pictures and felt his heart drop. There was Candy in bed with 3 men, Jake and others he once considered friends. Tim called Candy, but she didn't pick up. He went to the hotel bar to process the shock. The next morning, the tracker showed Candy's phone still at Jake's place. Marvin followed up with more photos. This time, 10 men, including Jake, his son Mike, and several company employees. Tim finished his business trip, booked an early flight home, and went straight to his house. Candy's car was gone, but her phone was still at Jake's. He quickly changed and called Ruby's office. When he reached Candy, her voice was breathless. "Where are you?" she asked too quickly. "I'm home," Tim lied. "Heading back from California." "Missed you," she said. "I'll pick you up when you land." "No need," he replied coldly. "I'll take a taxi." "Okay, bye." As he hung up, he realized she hadn't said, "I love you," and neither had he. It was a small but significant sign, and he wondered if she even noticed. With a heavy sigh, Tim left the house and headed to Ruby's office, determined to take the next step. Candy lay sprawled between Jake and his son Mike, caught in a web of guilt and indulgence. She had intended to leave after the first night, but the pleasure she felt in their company made it nearly impossible to walk away. Each moment felt like an escape from her reality. She told herself that once her classes started again, everything would go back to normal, and Tim would never know the truth. She could continue the act a little longer. The next 24 hours blurred as she stayed with Jake and Mike. When Jake went to work the following day, Mike kept her entertained, even inviting a few of his friends over. By the time Jake returned home, she was already in bed with Mike again. Afterward, Jake sat up, a mischievous grin tugging at his lips. "Maybe I should send Tim away more often," Jake teased, his voice laced with amusement. "You know my classes start soon. I'll be gone for a while," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Jake's grin only widened. "Why's that?" "Maybe Tim should learn how real men treat me," she joked, and both Jake and Mike laughed, clearly enjoying her discomfort. She hesitated for a moment, then added, "It was fun, but I still love Tim. I don't want to hurt him." Jake's smile faltered, but he quickly regained his composure. "I can arrange for Tim to be out of town for the weekend. That way you can come over and play with us." Candy laughed, but it was nervous. "It sounds funny, but eventually he'll find out. Tim's not an idiot." Jake picked up a camera, the smile returning to his face. "Don't worry about Tim. I'll handle him." There was a brief pause, and then Jake added, "There's one more thing." "What's that?" Candy asked, confused. "I don't want you having sex with him anymore," Jake said, his tone suddenly more serious. "You belong to us now." "Understood?" Candy froze, her heart pounding in her chest. "But how do I do that?" "You'll figure it out," Jake said dismissively. "Come up with some excuse. Say you're tired or you've got a headache." "Okay, I'll try," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The rest of the afternoon was a blur of more men arriving at the house. Mike's friends were all given the opportunity to sample her products, and Candy once again played her part. It was official now. She was part of their world, and despite her inner turmoil, a twisted part of her found herself enjoying it. Back home, Tim was devastated by the evidence Marvin had sent him. Along with the photographs, there were 2 DVDs showing his wife in compromising positions with multiple men, things she had never done with him. The love he had for her was quickly eroding, replaced by an overwhelming sense of betrayal. Ruby, his lawyer, did her best to console him, but it was clear that the damage was done. "How could she do this?" Tim thought, staring blankly at the images. 5 years, and she turns on me just like that. What did I do wrong? And Jake, I thought he was my friend. Ruby gave him a sympathetic look. "I'll file for divorce, citing infidelity," she said gently. "We can also consider filing a lawsuit for alienation of affection against Jake and the other men. It's not a sure thing, but we might get a decent settlement." Tim's response was flat, lifeless. "Do what you have to do. Just don't do anything reckless," Ruby warned. "I really don't want to be bailing you out of jail." Tim nodded, but his eyes were empty. "I won't. Don't worry." Ruby stood up. "I can have the paperwork ready in a few days. In the meantime, just try to act normal around her." Tim scoffed bitterly. "I'm not an actor, and I'll never touch her again. God only knows what she's been doing with those men." "Tell her you're not feeling well," Ruby suggested. "That should buy you some time." "Okay," Tim muttered. Leaving her office, the full weight of his situation hit him. There was no way he could ever work with Jake again, let alone face the men who had betrayed him. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he had been holding onto for a long time. "Hello," came the voice on the other end. "John, it's Tim Burns," Tim said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Tim, good to hear from you. How have you been?" John Carlson, the CEO of Empire, responded. "Not great," Tim said flatly. "Listen, is the position at Empire still available?" There was a brief silence before John spoke again, his tone now serious. "Of course. Are you finally ready to make the jump to a real company?" "Yeah, something like that," Tim said. "I just can't work with Jake anymore. Too much has happened." John's voice softened with concern. "I'm sorry to hear that. Is there anything I can do to help?" "Just give me a job," Tim said, his voice hardening. "I'll work just as hard for you as I did for Jake." "Absolutely," John replied. "Can you start Monday?" "Definitely," Tim confirmed. "Great. Look, why don't you and your wife come over tonight for dinner? Rose is making her famous lasagna, and we can catch up while we go over the details." Tim hesitated, but the words came out without hesitation. "I can't bring Candy." John's voice shifted with concern. "What's going on? Is everything okay?" "I'll explain more when I see you," Tim said, his tone distant. "Of course," John replied, his voice warm with concern. "You know, Rose is a licensed counselor. If you want, she can help." Tim's mind raced, but he appreciated the offer. That sounds good. I'll take you up on that. Okay, I'll let Rose know, John said. Can you be here by 6:30? Yeah, I'll be there, Tim said, feeling a small weight lift off his shoulders. After hanging up, Tim felt some of the tension ease out of him. He started the car and drove home, but as soon as he arrived, he noticed that Candy still hadn't returned. He went inside, changed quickly, and sat down to write his resignation letter. Around 5 p.m., Candy walked in, but Tim was too absorbed in his thoughts to even look up. She came over to kiss him, but he turned his cheek, leaving her with a peck on the side of his face. Surprised, she paused and gave him a puzzled look. Is everything okay? She asked softly. Not really, Tim replied. I don't feel well. Jet lag, I guess. I'll sleep on the futon when I get back tonight. Will you come back? She asked, her voice tinged with worry. I'm meeting someone for dinner, Tim said, trying to keep his tone neutral. Are you dating someone? She asked, her curiosity sharp. Am I cheating on you? Tim asked coldly, his eyes never leaving her face. No, she replied quickly. I never cheated on you, and I don't plan to. Can you say the same? Tim's voice was icy. She recoiled, her eyes wide with panic. Does he know? Tim didn't answer. No, he'll never find out. Candy tried to play it cool. Of course I can handle it. Tim's eyes narrowed. So how was your trip to California? His voice was distant, uninterested. It went well, she answered quickly, avoiding his gaze. It was tough, but still fun. Tim's face remained impassive. I bet, he said flatly. He glanced at his watch, not even bothering to make eye contact. I should get going, he said, saving his work and shutting down the computer. He stood up, walked past her without a word, and headed toward the bedroom to change. When he emerged, Candy was sitting on the sofa, clearly waiting for him. How long will you be gone? She asked, trying to sound casual. I don't know, Tim answered, his tone stiff. Don't wait up. Goodbye, he said, grabbing his keys and heading for the door, leaving her behind. As Tim drove off, Candy couldn't shake the odd feeling that something had shifted. He didn't kiss her goodbye, nor did he tell her he loved her, something he always did before leaving. The silence between them lingered, and she couldn't help but wonder if it meant something more than just a bad mood. Watching his car disappear down the street, she immediately reached for her phone and dialed Jake's number. What she didn't know was that their conversation was being recorded. Jake, I think Tim knows something's up, she said, her voice filled with anxiety. Why do you think that? Jake asked, sounding intrigued. He didn't kiss me, didn't even say he loved me, she replied, her words tumbling out. Normally he always does, but today he was cold, just said he had dinner plans and left. Something's off. Jake's voice shifted, now laced with curiosity. Who's he having dinner with? He didn't say, she answered, her voice cracking. And it's not just that. He was distant, almost like he was pulling away. Jake, what if he knows? What if he's planning to leave me? Jake chuckled on the other end of the line, his amusement clear. So what if he does? If he walks, you've got a place with us. Don't worry about Tim. I'll make sure he stays out of the picture. But I don't want to lose him, Candy exclaimed, a pang of panic rising in her chest. I still love him. Jake's laughter echoed through the phone. Yeah, I've seen just how much you love him over the last couple of days, he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Candy's face flushed with guilt, but she tried to steady her voice. It's not like that, Jake. I know what I did, and I liked it. But I don't want to lose Tim. I really do love him. Jake's voice softened, but there was an edge to it. Exactly. But let him stew for a bit. He'll come around. And if he doesn't, well, we can handle that too. Candy's pulse quickened. You're not going to hurt him, are you? No, we're not going to hurt him, Jake replied, his voice low and matter-of-fact. We'll just make sure he understands how things are going to be from now on. And you're going to help us make that clear. Candy was taken aback, her mind racing. What do you mean? When the time comes, Jake continued, you'll help us explain everything to him. Remember who you're with now. You wouldn't want the school board to see those videos we have, would you? Candy's breath caught in her throat. You wouldn't? Oh, I would, Jake said, his voice growing darker. I've got plenty of footage of you out there on hikes in compromising positions. Your body belongs to me now, Candy, so you need to keep Tim in line. Defeated and terrified, Candy's shoulders slumped. Okay, Jake, she whispered, but please don't hurt him. Jake laughed lightly. Sure, whatever you say, he said before hanging up. Tim's mind was elsewhere as he pulled up to John and Rose Carlson's impressive 2-story home. He grabbed a bottle of wine he'd picked up on the way over and rang the doorbell. John greeted him with a warm smile and accepted the wine. "Come on in, Tim," he said. "Thanks for the wine. This will be perfect for tonight." John led him to the dining room where Rose was waiting with a fresh batch of her famous lasagna. "Tim, I'd like you to meet my wife, Rose," John said. "Rose, this is Tim Burns, our new customer service rep." Tim shook her hand, feeling the warmth in her touch. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Carlson," he said. "Please, call me Rose," she replied with a smile. Mrs. Carlson sounds so formal. As they sat at the table, Rose served the lasagna, and John poured the wine. Tim couldn't help but comment, "This is the best lasagna I've ever had, seriously." "I'm glad you like it," Rose replied, beaming. "It's one of my specialties." John smiled at them both, then turned to Tim. "So, I've been meaning to ask, if you don't mind me prying. What made you leave Jake so suddenly? Did something happen?" Tim paused, taking a deep breath. "Yeah, something happened," he said quietly, his voice heavy. Rose reached out gently, her tone soothing. "Please, Tim. If you're ready, we're here to listen." Tim took a long pause, his mind racing through the events of the past few days. Finally, he spoke, his voice breaking as he relived the pain. She's been sleeping with other men. Jake, Mike, their friends, everyone. I found out, and it just destroyed me." John sat back in his chair, clearly shocked. "Jesus," he said, shaking his head. That's chilling. I'm really sorry you're going through this. I had something similar happen to me, though the circumstances were different." "So what's your plan now?" John asked, his voice shifting. "Besides changing jobs, of course." Tim looked down at his glass, swirling the wine as if it might somehow make the conversation easier. "I've met with a lawyer. I'm filing for divorce. My lawyer says it should be an even split, but I don't really care at this point. I just want out." Rose, her expression softening, looked concerned. "What about counseling? Have you considered that?" Tim shook his head, frustrated. "It's gone too far, Rose. I don't even recognize her anymore. It's like one day she just snapped and turned into someone else. I don't know what happened." Rose placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "I can only imagine how hard this is. But how are you coping with everything?" Tim exhaled slowly. "Not well. My lawyer says I should act normal around her, but it's impossible. I can't even look at her without feeling disgusted." "Maybe talking to someone could help," Rose suggested gently. "A psychologist, perhaps?" Tim nodded, trying to gather his thoughts. "I'll manage. I've got this. It's a lot." John glanced at Rose and then back at Tim. "I think Rose could really help you get through this. She's the best in the business, and if you're open to it, we could set something up. Plus, it's part of your social benefits package." Tim managed a bitter laugh. "That's definitely a bonus." "I'm serious," John said, his voice firm. "When I was in a dark place, Rose helped me more than I can explain. I know she can help you too." Rose turned to John. "I can fit him in. An hour a week should do wonders." Tim thought for a moment before nodding. "All right, I'll do it." "Good man," John said, clapping him on the back. "I'll make sure you get the time for it. Work with Rose. Let us know how it goes." "Thanks," Tim said, standing up. "Now, if you don't mind, John and I are going to step into the office to go over my new role." "I don't mind at all," Rose replied, giving Tim a kind smile. "Looking forward to working with you, Tim." "Thank you," Tim said, nodding at her as he followed John toward the office. After a productive 2-hour meeting in John's home office, where they discussed Tim's new role, Tim felt a renewed sense of control over his life. John poured them each a glass of brandy to cap off their conversation, and Tim shook his hand before leaving. He felt like he was taking back the reins of his future. Tim arrived home around 10 p.m., noticing the lights were still on inside. He hoped Candy was alone. After parking, he walked in and saw her sitting on the couch. "So, how did your little meeting go?" she asked, her voice casual. "Pretty good, thanks," Tim replied. "Now, if you don't mind, I'm heading to bed. Good night." He walked to the second bedroom where he kept his computer and began undressing. "Are you sleeping here tonight?" Candy asked from the doorway. "Yes," Tim answered, avoiding her gaze. "I'm still not feeling well, so I'll sleep on the futon." "Is that a problem?" she asked, sounding confused. "No, it's fine," he replied, still not looking at her. She hesitated. "It's just, you've been gone for 3 days, and I was hoping we could, spend some time together." Tim paused, then replied flatly, "I'm not in the mood today. In fact, the thought of being with you right now, it disgusts me." Candy's face fell. Okay, she said quietly. Maybe tomorrow. Tim shook his head. I don't know. We'll see. Candy stood there for a moment, then turned to leave, her mind racing. Did he know what had been happening? Did he know about everything? The next morning, Tim woke up before Candy. He grabbed the resignation letter he'd prepared and poured himself a cup of coffee. On the kitchen table, he noticed Candy's purse and decided to download the audio from yesterday's phone call. As he grabbed the recorder, he couldn't shake the feeling of finality. He was done. He left the house without saying a word to Candy, the door closing softly behind him. She heard it but didn't move. Instead, she laid back down, tears soaking her pillow. At work, Tim barely acknowledged anyone. He greeted his secretary and went straight to his office, shutting the door behind him. He was just finishing up when Jake walked in. "What's this?" Jake asked, noticing the resignation letter in Tim's hand. Tim pulled out 2 envelopes from his briefcase. "One's a signed contract from California, and the other's my resignation, effective immediately. You owe me a bonus for securing the California deal, as well as my final salary and the remainder of my vacation days." Jake's expression shifted to disbelief. "Resignation? Why are you leaving?" Tim looked at him, unimpressed. "You really don't know why? Do you think I'm stupid?" Jake, taken aback, tried to recover. "Look, Tim, let's talk about this." But Tim cut him off. "There's nothing to talk about. I'm done here. I thought we were friends, but you've stabbed me in the back and ruined my marriage. You can find someone else to mess with." Jake raised an eyebrow. "So that's what this is about? Come on, man. Your wife wanted it. I didn't force her." Tim's fists clenched. "How long has this been going on? How long have you been sleeping with my wife?" Jake smirked, seemingly unfazed. "The first time was at the campsite. You and the guys were skiing and she came to me. She practically begged me. She even said I was bigger than you." Tim's blood ran cold. "So you took advantage of her? At the campsite?" "Yeah, she practically threw herself at me," Jake said casually. "And it was right after you sent me away for some work stuff. That was your plan, right? Get me out of the way so you could sleep with my wife." Jake grinned as he nodded. "So what?" Tim was seething. "And hiring her for your party? That was just another excuse to get her into bed, wasn't it?" Jake didn't even flinch. "Yeah, that's right. What's the big deal?" Tim's hand went into his pocket, pulling out his phone. He stopped the recording he'd started earlier when Jake entered. "Thanks for the confession, Jake," Tim said coldly. "Now I'm done here. I'll go to HR and I won't bother you again." Jake moved to stop him. "You can't use that recording." "We'll see about that," Tim said, his voice steady as he stood up to leave. "Goodbye, Jake. I hope you rot." "Wait a minute," Jake called out, grabbing a photo of Candy from Tim's desk. "You forgot this." Tim turned, his face a mask of indifference. "I don't need it. You and your son can have her. You both want her that badly? Take her. I'm done with both of you." Tim turned and walked out of the office, leaving Jake behind, staring after him in confusion, trying to figure out how Tim had found out about his betrayal. Meanwhile, Candy was on the phone, her voice trembling. "What do you mean he resigned?" Jake's voice was rough. "When he came in, he handed me the signed contract and his resignation letter, then walked out. He knows, Candy. I don't know how, but he knows." Panic gripped Candy. "What did you say to him?" Jake didn't hesitate. "I told him everything. About the hike. About the first time." Candy's heart sank. "You're an idiot." Jake didn't sound remorseful. "Well, he asked. I told him. He also left a picture of you from his desk. He didn't want it." Tears streamed down Candy's face as she whispered, "Unbelievable. What now?" Jake sighed. "Not my problem. He's your husband. You handle it. Unless you want me to make him see things differently." "No," she said, her voice breaking. "You've done enough. Stay out of it. I'll deal with it." Jake didn't argue. "Fine, I'm out. It's on you now." He hung up. Candy sat there, phone in hand, tears still falling. She didn't want a divorce, but she knew Tim wouldn't tolerate her infidelity. She had to find a way to make things right. Sitting on the couch, holding her head in her hands, she realized how much she had already lost. Tim pulled into the driveway, his grip tightening on the steering wheel as he spotted Candy's car parked in its usual spot. He scanned the area, ensuring there was no sign of Jake or anyone else. With a deep breath, he grabbed his briefcase and a box of personal belongings from the passenger seat, then headed inside. Candy was lounging on the couch, but Tim ignored her entirely. Without a glance in her direction, he walked straight to his home office, shutting and locking the door behind him. Sitting at his desk, Tim quickly pulled up the audio recorder he had used and found the file he was looking for. the incriminating conversation between Candy and Jake. He listened to it once more, his jaw tightening with each word. Then, without hesitation, he forwarded the file to his lawyer and called her. "Tim," she greeted, "I just received your email. I'm finalizing the documents now." "How soon can they be filed?" Tim asked, his tone sharp. "If you're ready, I can have my bailiff deliver them this afternoon," she replied. "That works," Tim said firmly. "Let's get it done." After hanging up, Tim walked to the safe in the corner of the room and opened it, pulling out his old .45 semi-automatic pistol. He had no intention of using it, but the weight of the tool in his hand steadied him. He didn't trust the situation with Jake and wanted to be prepared. Carrying it into the kitchen, he set the weapon on the table before looking directly at Candy. "We need to talk," he said flatly. Her eyes flicked to the tool and her brows furrowed. "Is that really necessary?" she asked, a note of fear in her voice. Tim's expression didn't waver. "I don't plan to use it unless I have to," he said. "But I won't take chances if your friend decides to show up." Candy blinked, feigning confusion. "What are you talking about?" Tim leaned forward, his tone icy. "Don't play dumb with me, Candy. I'm done with your games. Sit down, now." Reluctantly, Candy sank into a chair, her hands fidgeting in her lap. She didn't know what to expect, but could feel the weight of Tim's anger. "Here's the deal," Tim began. "Later today, you'll be served with divorce papers." Her mouth fell open in shock. "Divorce? What? No, Tim, I don't want that. I love you." Tim scoffed, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Love me? Spare me the lies. I know everything about Jake, his son, and all the other men you've been screwing lately. That's why I'm filing for divorce. Infidelity." Candy's face paled. "Infidelity?" she stammered. "You can't prove anything." Tim smirked, reaching into his briefcase. He pulled out a folder and laid several photos on the table, each one time-stamped and damning. They showed Candy in compromising positions with multiple men, including Jake. "I've also got videos and audio recordings," he added. "Want to watch?" Candy's eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head, knowing she was trapped. "No." "Good," Tim said, his tone cold. "Considering the circumstances, I've been generous. No alimony. You'll get half of what's in the bank, and we'll each keep our pensions. I've already canceled your credit cards and cut you a cashier's check for your share. There's also a restraining order. You're to stay at least 500 feet away from me, my home, and my workplace. You have until the papers are served to pack your things and leave." "You're throwing me out," Candy whispered, her voice breaking as tears rolled down her cheeks. "Call it what you want," Tim said, "but yes, you're leaving." "What if I contest the divorce?" she asked, desperation creeping into her voice. Tim laughed bitterly. "Go ahead, try. But consider this. What will your school board think when they see these photos and videos? Do you think the parents of your students will want you teaching their kids after this?" Candy's face crumpled. "You wouldn't want to gamble on that?" Tim shot back, his expression unyielding. She lowered her head, her voice barely audible. "No, I'll cooperate." "Good," Tim said, leaning back. "Oh, and one more thing. You'll hand over your wedding rings and you'll stop using my last name." Candy's head snapped up, disbelief etched on her face. "You've turned into a heartless fool," she said, pulling the rings off her fingers. "Maybe," Tim replied coldly, "but you gave me every reason to be." He leaned forward, his voice laced with disgust. "I have just one question. What happened to you? What turned you into someone capable of this betrayal?" Candy hesitated, unable to meet his gaze. "It started on the second day of the hike," she admitted quietly. "You were off jet skiing and I was in the tent. Jake walked by and I don't know. I was lying there and he came in. At first it seemed innocent, but then he pulled his pants down and I didn't stop him." "So that's all it took?" Tim spat. "A guy drops his pants and you throw away everything? How many times did you screw him on that trip?" "Twice," she said, her voice trembling. "Once when you were skiing, and again when Jake sent you to the office." Tim shook his head in disbelief, pointing to the photos. "And none of these guys used protection, did they? Weren't you worried about getting pregnant or catching something?" "I'm on the pill," she said weakly. "That doesn't protect you from diseases," Tim snapped. "Is this the life you wanted?" "No," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Tim's voice hardened. "You know, I've had plenty of opportunities to cheat on you. Women far more beautiful than you throwing themselves at me, but I said no. Why? Because I believed I had a loyal wife at home. Turns out I was wrong." He stood up, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Start packing. Anything you leave behind will be trashed or donated. You're out as soon as you're served. Tim, please, Candy begged. We can work through this. Counseling, therapy. I'll do whatever it takes. Tim's eyes burned with contempt. No, I'll never forgive you. Maybe if it was one mistake, if you were sedated or coerced, I could consider it. But this, you willingly became Jake's plaything. That's unforgivable. But don't you love me enough to try? She asked, her voice breaking. He shook his head. Not anymore. I can't even look at you. The sooner you're gone, the better. Now get out of my sight and start packing. Candy sat there, her hands trembling, as Tim walked away without another word. She realized then that she had destroyed everything, and there was no way to fix it. Tearfully, Candy stood up and made her way to the master bedroom to begin packing. Tim watched from the doorway as she dragged out one garbage bag after another, clearly overwhelmed. After a while, she stopped and turned toward him, her eyes swollen from crying. Could you at least help me take this to the car? She asked quietly. Tim shook his head, his voice firm. No, that's your mess. You deal with it. And just so you know, anything you leave behind is either getting tossed or burned. Photos, the wedding dress, everything. Candy looked up at him, a flash of disbelief crossing her face. You wouldn't burn my wedding dress, would you? My parents paid thousands for that. Then you'd better take it with you, Tim replied coldly. Sobbing, Candy hauled the bag to her car and returned for another. Tim muttered under his breath, How much stuff does she have? A couple of hours later, Candy collapsed onto a bale of hay in the yard, exhausted. I can't fit anything else in the car, she said, wiping her eyes. Can I come back for the rest? Tim didn't even look up. No, you're not coming back. There's a restraining order in place. If you want to get your things, ask your parents. But I'm giving you a couple of days before I start throwing stuff out. Thank you, she said, though her voice was small and filled with dread. Candy's eyes widened with realization, and she whispered, What am I supposed to tell my parents? Tim didn't hold back. Tell them the truth. Tell them you cheated on me with Jake and others, and that's why I'm kicking you out. Her voice shook. But they'll disown me. I don't care, Tim said, his tone hard. And it'll be even worse if you try to make me look like the villain. You know how they feel about dishonesty. Just then, a knock came at the door. Looks like it's for you, Tim said, without even glancing at her. Candy slowly walked to the door and opened it to find a deputy sheriff standing on the porch. Candace Burns? He asked. That's me, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Do you have ID? He asked. Candy fumbled for her driver's license, handed it to him, and he examined it briefly before returning it to her, along with an envelope. You've been served, ma'am, the deputy said. There's an injunction requiring you to vacate the premises. You can sign the divorce papers now if you wish. Candy nodded, taking the papers and skimming them quickly before asking for a pen. She signed without protest. I'll return the signed documents to your lawyer, the deputy said. You need to leave immediately. If you try to come back, you'll be arrested. Do you understand? Candy's eyes filled with tears as she nodded. Yes, she said quietly, looking back at Tim. I'm sorry. Tim didn't even meet her gaze. Yeah, me too. Goodbye. Goodbye, she whispered, walking out the door. The deputy glanced at Tim, gave him a brief nod, and then turned to leave. The following days were a blur for Tim. Though Candy didn't attempt to contact him, Jake left 2 angry voicemails on Tim's home phone, each one more threatening than the last. Tim, I know you're there, Jake yelled in one message. If you don't drop this lawsuit, I'll come over and kick your A. Tim smirked, copied the voicemail, and forwarded it to his lawyer, Ruby, who immediately contacted the sheriff's department. Candy's parents called as well, asking if they could come pick up more of her things. Sure, just make sure she's not with you, Tim said. There's a restraining order in place. All right, said George, Candy's father, with a resigned sigh. When they arrived later, Bernice and George took what remained of Candy's belongings, but they didn't leave without trying to convince Tim to call off the divorce. Tim, she made a huge mistake, Bernice said, her voice pleading. She's crazy about you. Just forget about all this and take her back. Tim looked at her skeptically. What exactly did she tell you? She said she had a fight with your boss, Bernice replied, looking down. That's it? Tim asked. Well, yeah, Bernice said, shifting uncomfortably. She didn't go into any detail, and we didn't press her. Tim went to his desk and grabbed an envelope full of photos and DVDs. He handed them to Bernice and George, and their faces drained of color as they flipped through the evidence. I'm sorry she didn't tell you the whole truth, Tim said coldly. But this is what really happened. Bernice gasped, her face pale. I had no idea it was this bad. I'm so sorry, Tim. I don't blame you, she added, her voice soft. George's face reddened with fury. I'll have a serious talk with our daughter. This is unbelievable. He looked up at Tim. Have you done anything with these photos yet? Tim shook his head. Not yet, but I warned her not to fight the divorce. After some brief commiseration, they finished packing the last of Candy's things and left. They gave Tim a warm hug before heading out, wishing him the best despite everything. Later that day, as Tim sat watching TV, he heard a knock on the door. He peered through the peephole and saw Jake, Mike, and two other men Tim recognized from his old workplace. Tim didn't hesitate. He walked into his office, grabbed the tool from the safe, and dialed emergency. Holding the weapon behind his back, he opened the door just enough to keep them from rushing in. We're gonna kick your A, Tim, Jake snarled, stepping forward. Tim calmly pulled the tool out and aimed it directly at Jake. You really want to test me? Tim asked, his voice deadly quiet. Just so you know, I've already called emergency. If you're still here when the cops arrive, you're all going to jail for violating a restraining order. One of the other men spoke up, his voice uncertain. Jake, I think he's serious. Jake hesitated, glancing at the others. Just then, sirens began to wail in the distance, and red and blue lights flashed through the windows. Tim didn't flinch. Yes, Jake, I'm serious. As Jake turned to leave, two large uniformed officers appeared at the door, blocking their exit. Tim lowered the tool as one of the officers stepped forward. Put the tool down, sir, one of the officers said, his tone firm but calm. Tim obeyed, placing the tool on the kitchen table. Sir, these men are violating the restraining order, Tim said, gesturing to Jake and his friends. They broke into my house and threatened me. I want them arrested. Do you have a copy of the order? The other officer asked. Tim nodded. I've got it right here. Tim handed the officer the envelope from the kitchen table, and the officer took it, studying the contents carefully. After a few moments, he returned the document to Tim and turned to face the group of 4 men. Turn around and put your hands behind your back, he commanded. The men glared at Tim as the officers cuffed them and began reading their rights. Once they were restrained, one of the officers turned back to Tim. Do you have a permit for this tool? He asked. Yes, Tim answered. Would you like to see it? He pulled out his wallet and showed the officer both his driver's license and his NRA certification card. The officer nodded after inspecting the cards. All right, the officer said. Just be careful with it. I will, officer, thanks, Tim responded. The following 3 months felt like a whirlwind for Tim. He was much happier at Empire than he had ever been at Jake's company. Weekly sessions with Rose helped him manage his anger and trust issues, while he also joined a gym and worked out 3 times a week. He took up martial arts classes to improve his mental focus and discipline, and he stuck to a new diet and exercise plan Rose suggested. The divorce went through without any obstacles, as Candy didn't fight it. The alienation of affection lawsuit was a bit trickier. Ruby had warned that some people might lose their jobs because of it, and indeed, 2 of Tim's colleagues were fired. But the case against Jake surprised everyone. After hearing the testimonies and reviewing the evidence, including Jake's financial records, the judge ruled in Tim's favor, awarding him $1 million in damages. Mr. Hudson, your actions throughout this case have been commendable, the judge declared. You took advantage of a man who trusted you, and you misused your position as his employer to deliberately destroy his marriage and family. Additionally, you violated the restraining order on multiple occasions. I'm ruling in favor of the plaintiff and ordering Mr. Hudson to be compensated $1 million. Jake's lawyer jumped up in protest. Your Honor, this is completely unlawful, the judge shot back. Mr. Winthrop, the court finds Mr. Hudson's actions not only illegal but reprehensible. The decision stands. Jake's lawyer, clearly frustrated, asked, when should this restitution be made? The judge replied firmly, immediately, unless, of course, your client prefers to spend time in jail for contempt of court. No, Your Honor, Winthrop said, sitting back down. My client will pay as ordered. The judge gave him one last warning. And if that check bounces, you'll regret it. He slammed his gavel, ending the hearing. Jake quickly wrote out a check, which his lawyer passed to the bailiff. After the judge confirmed the check, it was handed to Ruby, who then gave it to Tim. To Tim's surprise, the check cleared, and Ruby's portion of the judgment was paid. Meanwhile, word of the lawsuit spread, and several of Jake's former clients contacted Tim. Many businesses began distancing themselves from Jake, unwilling to associate with someone who had intentionally ruined another man's life. Tim believed Jake's career was as good as over and that he would be bankrupt within the year. During all of this, Tim avoided dating, even though several women from work showed interest in him. He felt it was important to fully close the chapter on his marriage before moving forward with anyone else. Once the divorce was finalized, he would be ready to start fresh. After the divorce was complete, Tim celebrated with friends from work. A few months later, Candy's mother, Bernice, reached out to him. "Tim, this is Bernice. Do you have a moment to talk?" she asked. "Of course, Bernice," Tim said. "What's going on?" "It's about Candy," Bernice began. "She's HIV positive. She just got her test results." Tim felt a knot in his stomach. "I'm sorry to hear that, Bernice, but honestly, I'm not surprised. We're divorced now, so I'm not responsible for her anymore. She's no longer covered under my insurance." "I know that," Bernice replied, "but I was hoping maybe you'd talk to her. She's really struggling right now." Tim paused for a moment, then agreed. "All right, I'll come by for a bit." "Thank you, Tim. I really appreciate it," Bernice said, sounding relieved. When Tim arrived at Bernice and George's house, he was taken aback by how frail and sickly Candy looked. She slowly walked toward him, but he raised a hand, signaling her to stay back. She sat down on the couch, sadness in her eyes as she looked at him. "You look good, Tim," she said quietly. "Better than I remember. How are you doing?" "I'm doing well, Candy," Tim answered. "New job, new friends, new perspective on life. How about you?" "Not well," she replied softly. "You know I'm HIV positive." "I know," Tim said, his tone even. "I'm sorry to hear that, but I'm not really surprised. Do you know when you were infected?" Candy looked down. "I think it happened one of the times I was with Jake. That day I slept with several guys without protection." "Has Jake been tested yet?" Tim asked. "No," she replied, shaking her head. "I still need to tell him, but I'm not looking forward to it." "I can imagine," Tim said. "He's not going to take it well." "No, he won't," she agreed. "But Tim, I just wanted to apologize. I know what I did hurt you, and I ruined a lot of lives. I could have stopped at any point, but I didn't. I let my desire and selfishness control me. Now I'm paying the price for it. I had the best husband, the best partner anyone could ask for, and I threw it all away for something temporary. I know you have every right to hate me, but I don't want to die without knowing that you've forgiven me." Tim reflected on her words, processing the sincerity in her apology. It was the first time Candy had taken responsibility for her actions and acknowledged the consequences. He recalled his therapy sessions with Rose, realizing that holding on to bitterness wouldn't help him heal. He needed to let go if he ever wanted to move forward. "All right, Candy," he said softly. "I forgive you." She broke down into tears, collapsing into a nearby chair. Tim felt an urge to comfort her, but as he stood, she waved him off, signaling she didn't need his embrace. "Thank you, Tim," she choked out through sobs. "You don't know how much this means to me." Tim took a deep breath, trying to keep his composure. "I want you to find someone who truly loves you, someone you can trust and build a life with. You deserve that. As for me, I'm done with it all. I've moved on." "Thank you," she whispered. "I will. And if you ever need someone to talk to," he added, "don't hesitate to reach out." "I will, Tim. Thank you for coming," she said, her voice weak but sincere. "I've missed you these last few months." "I miss the woman I married," Tim said flatly, the words hanging between them. "By the way," he asked, "how are things with Jake and Mike?" She shook her head sadly. "It's bad. He's become unbearable. Losing in court really set him off, and his business is falling apart because of it." "I noticed," Tim muttered, the anger still fresh in his mind. "Has he hurt you?" he asked, concerned. "Not physically yet," she replied, "but his temper is getting worse." "If you want me there when you tell him about your diagnosis, I'll come," Tim offered. "No," she said, shaking her head. "This is something I need to do on my own." Candy sighed, her eyes downcast. "You know, sometimes I think if I just kicked him out that first day, we might still be together." "Maybe," Tim said, his voice steady. "But I think it would have happened eventually. He was chasing you for a long time." "I think you're right," she agreed quietly. "Look, I'm exhausted," she said, wiping her eyes. "I need to rest before I head back." "Thanks again for coming," she added, her voice barely above a whisper. "It means more than you know." "You're welcome, Candy," Tim said. "Just remember, if you ever want to talk, I'm here." "I will," she nodded, wiping tears from her cheeks. "I will." "Goodbye, Tim," she said, her voice soft and distant. Please think about me sometimes. Tim paused before responding, a deep unease settling in his chest. I will, Candy, but please, don't do anything reckless, all right? She gave him a faint, weak smile. I won't, she said. Tim stood to leave, but before he could reach the door, Bernice stepped forward and embraced him. Thank you, Tim, she said quietly. This means more to her than you realize. And to me, too, Tim replied, his voice sincere. Take care of her, Tim added, pulling back from the hug. I will, Bernice promised. A few weeks later, Tim was sitting on his couch, eating dinner while watching the evening news, when a report caught his attention. The bodies of local businessman Jacob Hudson, his son, and a woman believed to be his mistress were discovered earlier today in what authorities are calling a double homicide self-destruction. The sufferers were found dead from fire shot wounds. Police are investigating, and more details will be provided as they are released. Tim's heart sank as he processed the news. He had feared it could be her, and now the truth was undeniable. He immediately dialed Bernice's number. When she picked up, her sobs filled the line. Bernice, what happened? Tim asked, his voice tight. We just found out, Tim. Candy's gone. Jake shot her, then his son, and finally himself. She sobbed, barely able to speak. Tim's stomach twisted in shock. Oh my God. I saw the news. I was hoping it wasn't her. I'm so sorry. That was her, Bernice confirmed. Do they have any idea why this happened? They're not sure yet, Bernice replied, trying to catch her breath. But I think when Candy told Jake about her HIV, he lost it. They're doing an autopsy now. I'm really sorry, Bernice, Tim said, his voice soft. I never wanted this to happen. I know, she replied. Candy made her own choices, but losing your only child, it's unbearable. I'm just thankful you were able to make peace with her before it happened. Tim paused for a moment. I like to think she's in a better place now. Thank you, Tim, Bernice said through her tears. Let me know if you need anything. A couple of weeks later, Candy's memorial service was held, and Tim took the day off work to attend with her parents. The autopsy results confirmed that both Jake and Mike, along with Candy, were HIV positive. Police concluded that Candy had told Jake about her diagnosis, suggesting they get tested, and when the results came back positive for both men, Jake's fury escalated. He shot Candy in a fit of rage, then eliminated his son, and finally took his own life. Tim spent the next several days in quiet mourning, reflecting on the years he had shared with Candy. But just when he thought he had begun to heal, he received an unexpected visit from Cynthia Stone, one of his colleagues. Hey, cowboy, she said with a smile. You look like you could use a drink. How about joining us for happy hour tonight? Tim thought for a moment, tempted to decline, but then he changed his mind. Why not? He said, finally relenting. I could use some company. Great! Meet us at Hitchhikers after work, Cynthia said, her smile bright. I'll be there, Tim said, feeling the weight of the past few months begin to lift, if only a little. As Cynthia left, Tim leaned back in his chair and thought, the cycle of life goes on. Tim Burns walked into Hitchhikers that evening, greeted by the warm buzz of conversation and the inviting scent of grilled food. The bar was alive with the hum of patrons unwinding from the day, laughter mingling with the soft strum of a guitarist performing in the corner. It was a scene Tim hadn't been part of in what felt like a lifetime. He hesitated by the door, a flicker of self-doubt urging him to turn around and retreat into his solitude. Then he spotted Cynthia, her blonde hair catching the dim light as she waved at him from a corner booth. Her smile was bright, genuine, and for the first time in months, Tim felt the stirrings of something resembling hope. Taking a deep breath, he made his way to the table, his steps growing steadier with each stride. Hey, cowboy, Cynthia greeted, patting the seat next to her. We saved you a spot. The table was filled with his colleagues from Empire, a group he'd quickly come to respect. They welcomed him with warmth and familiarity, a stark contrast to the guarded interactions he'd endured at his previous job. As drinks were poured and stories shared, Tim found himself laughing, a real, unrestrained laugh that surprised even him. He realized how long it had been since he felt this light, this free. As the night wore on, the conversation shifted from work to life, with each person sharing snippets of their dreams and struggles. When it was Tim's turn, he hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. But Cynthia nudged him gently. Come on, Tim, she said with a grin. We're all friends here. Tim smiled, took a sip of his drink, and began. He spoke of his new job, the fresh start it offered, and the goals he was setting for himself. He carefully avoided the deeper scars of his past, but there was no bitterness in his voice, only determination. The table listened intently, their encouragement palpable. After a while, Cynthia leaned in, her expression softening. "You know, Tim, you're stronger than you think. Not everyone could have come out of what you've been through with their head held high." Tim gave her a faint smile. "Maybe, but I couldn't have done it without a little help and a lot of perspective." As the group raised their glasses in a toast to new beginnings, Tim allowed himself to reflect. Candy's betrayal, Jake's manipulation, and the whirlwind of events that followed had left deep scars. Yet those wounds had also taught him resilience and clarity. He thought of Candy, not with anger, but with a quiet sense of closure. He hoped she had found peace, wherever she was. Later, as the gathering began to wind down, Cynthia turned to him with a mischievous glint in her eye. "You know, Tim, we do this every Friday. You should make it a regular thing." Tim chuckled. "I might just take you up on that." Walking out of Hitchhikers later that night, Tim felt the cool breeze against his face. The darkness outside wasn't oppressive, but comforting, a reminder of how far he had come. He looked up at the stars, their light unwavering, and smiled. His life wasn't perfect, but it was his again. There were challenges ahead, no doubt, but Tim no longer feared them. He had learned to face adversity head-on, to carve his path forward even when the way seemed uncertain. As he climbed into his car, a thought struck him. The cycle of life was relentless, carrying joy and sorrow in equal measure, but in its ebb and flow there was always a chance to start over, to rebuild. Tim wasn't just surviving anymore, he was living. For the first time in a long time, tomorrow felt like an opportunity, not an obligation, and that was more than enough.